Young did, or claims that he did.
Yes.
What was his conclusion?
Well,
did he conduct tests like you conducted?
No, actually, what he did is kind of a curious misunderstanding of an earlier publication. He was a very young man. He didn't have any scientific background at all, but he had become interested in this application of his talents, and he had read that a
I'm sorry.
he had read that James Rorimer, who at that time was a curator in the Metropolitan Museum, he later became director of the Metropolitan Museum, Rorimer had found that he could detect the restoration of marble objects by looking at them under ultraviolet light. A piece that would be inserted to restore, or maybe copy it or whatever, such a piece might look very much like the original marble into which it is fitted, but if you look at it under ultraviolet light, and if indeed the piece was of a different origin, it might have a different ultraviolet reflection, or it would look different under the ultraviolet light in the dark room. Now, Young completely misunderstood this, and he thought that ultraviolet light gave a distinctive fluorescence, which of course it doesn't, and if it does, then nobody knows what it is. And moreover, if you look at the whole piece, you can't make this differentiation. That's number one, of course. That's a first failing. The other is that the pieces that Rorimer looked at were marble and some ivory and some other things, but no calcite, no limestone, which is the material of which the Mansoor objects are made. And while it is true that chemically they are the same, crystallographically or physically they are entirely different. So one cannot simply conclude that one would apply to the other, even if the conclusions were otherwise correct, which they are not. And many of the scientists who have commented on the opinions and the documents that had preceded their own opinion were very, very critical about Young's report, which looks what it really is, a layman's report. And so this was the only report that was even that even claimed to be a scientific report that was not in favor of the Mansoors. All the scientific reports, all of the people who very carefully looked and studied the objects, they all said with various degrees of enthusiasm that they concluded the objects were antique. And some of them just pleaded ignorance, or that they didn't have the means, they didn't know of any tests, and it is true that there isn't any decisive test that tells you there that you turn a switch and say this is genuine, this is not genuine. But what you have to do is you have to provide evidence, and the evidence may be strong or weak, but if it comes from different directions and based on different observations, and they all point in the same direction, it becomes very strong evidence. And we don't like to speak of proof because that is a legal term which is very difficult to understand and to deal with. So this is essentially what we have to say about that. I don't know if you're interested in
I was going to ask you about Zaki Iskander.
Yes.
And he was the chief chemist of the Cairo Museum?
At that time, yes.
And he studied the pieces also?
He and his assistant, Zahira Mustafa, studied the pieces very carefully. And they, again, made studies on several different bases and concluded without any doubt to them that they were genuine. He studied the erosion patterns, he studied the patina, he studied the insect excretions that also become insoluble in the course of time, and several other aspects that I don't remember offhand. But it's a very good report, and it followed a much shorter report from an even better known Egyptologist, I don't know if it's Alfred Lucas, who wrote what is still today, after maybe 40 years or so, the Bible of the people who are interested in ancient Egyptian materials and industries, and that is, it's called just exactly that. And it's still used today, and there's no book that's better or even more to the point than that one. And this man, Lucas, studied the pieces and gave a favorable report without any qualifications, so much shorter and much less pervasive than Zaki Iskandar's report. Nevertheless, it's also a positive report.
Did you ever try to get in touch with Professor Young?
Yes, I did. I wrote him a letter after I had published an article in which I was very diplomatic about his efforts, and I wrote him that I asked him whether, in the light of the new evidence that had been provided, whether he had any comments or whether he might even retract his opinions, and I never got any answer. And much later I understood from people who knew the situation there that his lawyers, or the lawyers of the Boston Museum, had advised him not to answer it because they were afraid of lawsuits and all kinds of things. Of course, in the scientific community, we don't act that way. We don't just simply ignore a scientific question, but at least we answer and say we have your letter, and we have no further comments on it, but thank you anyway, something of that sort. But he didn't.
He didn't answer.
No.